Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Before we begin, please hit the like button if you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, and you can always join my Patreon. We have a big fundraising goal there, and I will talk about that at the end of the video. Today, for our first episode on the new playlist, Dark Cults, I have a hell of a story for you. Every cult story is crazy, every cult story is fascinating, but not every cult story has such a long-standing history of abuse and psychological terror as today's. Today we are talking about an insidious cult, a cult that doesn't want us talking about them because it is a very secretive group that shuns not only outsiders, but even its own as soon as they step even an inch out of line. We are talking about the Brethren, sometimes called the Exclusive Brethren. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's get into it. The history of this cult dates back 2 centuries to around 1680, and it grew till about 1720 for the most part. Around 1720, a group of Christians originating in Europe began to practice a more extreme form of Christianity. They established a religion called the German Baptist Brethren Church. The first real congregation was established in Plymouth, Devon, England, and then there was a sect in Ireland. Eventually, the cult would migrate to North America, with the reason for the migration being a dispute over doctrine that took place in 1845. A man named John Nelson Darby had a group of followers that believed he was in the right, and this group began to call themselves the Exclusive Brethren in order to distinguish themselves from the Brethren. Darby's group then broke away from the original group, which has since become known as the Open Brethren. So we're right back where we almost always land when discussing cults. The group forms, egos get in the way, one man says he's right and the other says he is, and before we know it, there's a split, with both men claiming that they are the one true speaker for God. Now, we see this all the time in these little groups in cults, but I'm going to make a prediction and say within the next 20 years, there is a good chance this is going to happen in the Mormon Church, which is big enough to be considered a mainstream religion. There are things happening in the Mormon Church where, let's just say this, one group is becoming more extreme and one group is staying more mainstream the way the church has been for the last 40 years or so. I think in this extreme group, they were gearing up to have someone like Tim Ballard take over and start his own sect. Now, Tim Ballard has since fallen from grace and that's not going to happen, but there are plenty of Tim Ballards out there. I foresee, unless something changes drastically, a split coming in the Mormon Church. There are already people that call themselves Mormon 2.0. I know a lot of you probably don't watch the Real Housewives shows. It's one of my guilty pleasures. There is a woman on that show. Her name is Lisa Barlow, and she owns a tequila company, and she wears very revealing dresses, and she says she's a Mormon. You ain't a Mormon, Lisa. You ain't a Mormon. And when people say that, she's like, you can't tell me how to be a Mormon. Yeah, you literally can. That's the whole thing about being Mormon or being in a religion. There's rules that you follow. She doesn't follow any of the rules. And she still says she's a Mormon. She's not a Mormon. But there are people like her in the church, and I sometimes hear them refer to themselves as Mormon 2.0. So it's already kind of happening, and I don't know. Come back to this video years from now. If I'm wrong, hell, it will be far from the first time. But I don't know. I feel something brewing. And we often see this in cults. They're started because people have a like thought, but then egos very quickly get in the way and there's friction between the men. Usually the men, it can be women, but it's usually men. Now, just before Darby died in 1882, things started to fall apart. This resulted in a third group breaking off that became known as the Kelly Brethren, and this group followed William Kelly. The different sects then had headquarters all over the world, but the largest sect is in Australia. Currently, there are sects in Germany, different parts of Europe, and here in the United States. Let's talk a little about what the Brethren believe in. The Lord's Supper or Holy Communion is a big part of the worship services within the Brethren. The Brethren reject evolution, and for the few who have their children enrolled in public school, they claim a religious exemption when evolution is being taught in school. Their children are removed from the classrooms and do not hear the lessons involving the science of evolution. I'm going to tell you something a lot of you will find shocking, but a lot of people will back me on this. I was never taught evolution. I never heard the word evolution in the 1970s or 1980s in school. I was never taught evolution. Rural southern Utah was not teaching evolutions in the 1980s, and I think that's terrifying. Then when I learned about evolution, I was still religious, and I would take the graph of the monkey that becomes a man and say, well, then why are there still monkeys? Because that's not how evolution happened. That chart with the monkey turning into the man, that's actually not how evolution happened. But anyways, I used to be one of those people tap dancing around the facts and making up my own thing, because it was cognitive dissonance. I had to, in order to stay sane in the religion that I was in. Well, actually, no one's ever really called me sane, but you know what I mean. The Brethren do not believe that women have any authority, especially over men, because of course they believe this. And they have a very strong belief in the coming apocalypse and in the rapture. The rapture is a very big part of this church. Now, the rapture is not taught in Mormonism. Like I say, most of you know I was born and raised in the Mormon church. I left around 38 years old. Everything I have learned about the rapture, I have learned through studying it outside of religion. I studied a lot more religion after I left the Mormon church than I ever did when I was in. If you're not familiar with it, here's a brief rundown. Some Christians, especially those in American evangelicalism, believe that there will come a time towards the end of the world when all dead Christian believers will be resurrected and joined with the Christians who are still alive. So I'm trying not to get in trouble here. So the Christian dead people will rise up. Their bodies will be made whole somehow. I've heard a little bit of this in Mormonism. And then they will join with the current believing Christians. So not zombies. They'll somehow be, magically restored to their full bodies, even though their bodies are decomposed. Then what happens after the dead Christians join with the living Christians is that the entire group will rise up into the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So the belief is that they are literally going to float up into the sky and be reunited with God in the sky, on the clouds. It's important to note that the concept of the rapture is not from historic Christianity. It was added, as many, many things have been added to the Bible and to the Christian doctrine, around 1830. Before that, there was no concept of the rapture. Now, even the Christians that believe in the rapture have disagreements on exactly what it means and who it will happen to. Many groups rely on the Gospel of Matthew and others rely on the book of Revelation for the details, with some believing that the rapture will happen very quickly and others believing it will take a period of time. But the Brethren are very firmly tied to the idea that they are living in the end times and that they must live their lives a certain way in order to be taken up to heaven when it is time for the rapture. Now, there is something quite different about some sects of the Brethren. They do not have a formal leadership structure, and that is very, very unusual in a cult setting. You have a very definitive hierarchy most of the time in a cult. But as I read about the many fallings out between the leaders of the Brethren, dating back 200 years, it became clear why they've gone away with a formal leadership structure. If no one is officially in charge, you can't challenge the leadership, right? It's a way of keeping everyone happy. If there's no leader, then it's very difficult to get angry at the leader by avoiding those types of disagreements. The Brethren have found a way to maintain its members without losing many to splinter groups that break off because they disagree with the leadership. Now, this doesn't mean there's never a disagreement. Quite the opposite. There are apparently a lot of arguments over doctrine, and when that happens, the battle lines are drawn down family lines. Your family members are expected to take your side if you happen to get into a doctrine war with the church, and sometimes the issue works itself out, sometimes it doesn't, and we're going to talk about that. Sometimes it results in people leaving the church, and when they do, and sometimes it ends in people disappearing from the church. But the exclusive Brethren have developed some type of hierarchy, a council of sorts, and then there is a man, a singular man who is seen as the leader, like their prophet. But this man, like within Mormonism, changes over time. Old leaders die and new leaders are put in their place. So the exclusive Brethren, the Brethren we're talking about today, has developed a form of structure in leadership where some of the other sects have not. The Brethren do not have typical churches. They have these buildings called rooms or halls, and that's how they refer to them. They post on a message board like this one, the time and date of their next meeting, and then those in the group gather at the designated time. The exclusive Brethren require that you are officially affiliated with their local assembly. Why? Because these members want to make sure they have very strict control over their membership, over what they wear, over what they eat and drink, and more. The Brethren believe that the world is ruled by the devil. The physical world is ruled by the devil, the good old devil. I watched some interviews with members of the Brethren and, these stories. Some of the men tell of interactions with the devil, where the devil tried to lure them away from their families. Other men talk about hearing the devil's voice when they're near a radio or a television, because you see, all media is controlled by the devil. You guys, I see so much of this shit now on TikTok. It is so disturbing to me. People talking about Doja Cat showed up with red rhinestones glued to her body and now she's a demon. Like, it is the year of our Lord, 2024, and we are not still doing demons, are we? Anyway, this is what the Brethren believe in. All media is controlled by the devil. Because the group has this very strong stance on Satan, they see him everywhere, and it causes them to live in secret. They do not make friends outside of the Brethren. They don't even eat with people who are not in the cult, because they believe that any association with people of the world opens them up to be controlled by the devil. What a sad existence, right? To believe that you are so powerless and such a ship on the sea with no control over your own life, and that there is this spooky ghost man just waiting for you to slip up so he can destroy you. I find that really, really sad. Very ridiculous, but more than that, I find it sad. What a waste of a life. Such an unempowered perspective, such a cowardly perspective, to blame everything on an imaginary figure instead of taking accountability and taking control of your own life and your choices. I'll shut up for a minute. Over the last couple of decades, the Brethren has become more secretive than ever. They have a lot of the same beliefs as the Amish do, but they do use technology like cars and electricity. No computers. They have a strong dislike of the public school system because, your kid might have a queer friend or a friend with a different skin color or different beliefs, and you can't just let your kids run willy-nilly with other kids. I mean, who does that? So the Brethren have even started constructing its own schools. The kids do not get college educations. It is actually a rule that you are not allowed to go to college because, then you get indoctrinated with that liberal media shit. I think that's so insulting to Republicans. Like, Republicans aren't able of going to college and sussing out for themselves what is indoctrination. I find that whole line of questioning and thinking just so stupid and insulting. In one interview I saw of a high priest within the Brethren, he said, when our kids go to college, they end up leaving the church. I wonder why. Because you let them out for the first time in their life and they're like, God damn, I'm in a cult. It's wild that people are able to think on their own when you let them think on their own. Crazy, I know. Most of the Brethren work in their own businesses or businesses owned by other cult members. The men do not wear neckties. I believe this has something to do with neckties being a symbol of Western culture. Women never cut their hair, and they are also required to cover the tops of their heads with a triangular kerchief-style headscarf. The women only wear dresses, no pants, and the other rule, and this is a big one, you must marry within the cult. Marrying someone outside the cult, where in the hell would you ever meet anyone outside the cult if you're working at a cult business, not allowed to go to school, not allowed to watch TV or be online? But marriage inside the cult is a big rule. They also highly frown on divorce. And when I say highly frown on, I mean they will kick you out. When the cult kicks you out, it's called withdrawn from. In Scientology, it's called SP, a suppressive person. In Mormonism, I'm an apostate. They call me an apostate. But if you leave the Brethren, they declare you withdrawn from. When you are labeled as withdrawn from, that means God has withdrawn his presence from you, and that means you're evil. It's just such degrading, damaging garbage. Utter nonsense, and just so damaging to the human spirit. It makes me sad and it makes me angry because these people were raised to believe this, and now you're telling them that they're the worst thing they could possibly be. It's very abusive. They use this scripture in Paul as foundation for their beliefs, let's be honest, as justification for their treatment of people they label as withdrawn from. This man, Owen Cook's story is really quite heartbreaking. His family found out he was dating a girl outside of the cult. So they made all of Owen's siblings move out of the family house and into homes with other cult members so Owen could be alone with his parents. Can you believe that? Taking little kids out of the house and away from their parents so that the parents can watch and control full-time the one they see as the black sheep. For 2 years, Owen lived alone with his parents, and his siblings were forced to live away until one day Owen said he'd had enough and he was leaving. He packed up and left the house, and the next day he walked by the house to see his other siblings being brought back into the home. In this interview, he gets very sad and he said, "I guess the one good thing I've ever done is brought my family back together by leaving it." That broke my heart. Regardless of how you feel about your family, when you're rejected by your family, it hurts. And I felt really, really sad when I heard him say that. Owen was labeled withdrawn from, and he has no contact with any of his family, and he says he misses them every day. That's what Jesus would want, right? Didn't you read that part about where Jesus wants to break up families and judge people and label people and throw them out on their own? That's funny, neither did I. Now, like I said, the brethren do use cars and electricity, but computers are strictly forbidden. They refer to a scripture in Revelation that talks about a man of sin who will use what they decipher to be a computer to destroy the world. Now, this has to do with the whole number 666 and the mark of the beast, which, by the way, is a misinterpretation. I believe in, I want to say Isaiah. I can't remember. But modern people have interpreted it to mean barcodes. It's just, look. The Bible has a lot of good information in it. It has a lot of good stories. These people did not know how the heart worked. They thought the moon was made out of cheese. They thought sacrificing goats would make it rain. What we're not going to do is take information from 2,000 years ago, twist it and turn it and manipulate it to mean something that these people could not even comprehend. A barcode. The whole mark of the beast 666 thing came from the emperor, let me remember the story right, would put a mark on your head if you were in good standing. And so people would start making fake marks on their forehead to make it look like they were in good standing when they weren't. And that was referred to as the mark of the beast meaning the evil people that were marking themselves, a false mark that didn't actually come from the emperor or the ruler at the time. I need to brush up a little bit, but it has something to do with that. We ain't talking about barcodes 2,000 years ago. We ain't actually talking about the number 666. Those are interpretations. The 666 thing came along later when the Bible was written and rewritten and rewritten and re-edited and re-edited and you can be as mad about that as you want. It's a fact. Does it mean everything in the Bible is bullshit? No. Does it mean we should take the Bible as literal instruction for our lives? Also no. Let's talk about the prince of the power of the air. I vaguely remember hearing this in seminary, I think. In the book of Ephesians 2, there are scriptures that talk about the prince of the power of the air, which people translate to mean Satan. Paul makes it clear that the course of the world follows the leadership and the design of Satan, who has special dominion over the air and over the earth, and his demons have more power on earth and in the air than angels do. You know, I am just always so damn confused. God is all powerful, but no, wait, Satan is more powerful on earth. God is the most powerful, but no, wait, he needs nut job pine cones like Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell to gather the 144,000 for him because some reason he can't do that on his own. Like, pick a lane, my guy. Pick a lane. It's so obvious to me when I talk about these things how triggered I still am. You know, I laugh and joke about it and I make bitchy comments about it because I'm wounded. There is a lot of talk in the brethren about Satan and how he is the prince of the power of the air. And that means that the brethren are always under attack. They live on the earth, and Satan, according to this scripture, has dominion over the earth, and that means they are always under attack. The Brethren also claim that there's a bunch of anti-Brethren propaganda online, and that is further proof that Satan is out to destroy them. Who, me? Am I that? Ex-members of the Brethren report that being in the Brethren is very peaceful and you feel very secure while you're in because you have this built-in family that lives very much inside a metaphorical fortress. You're in this little bubble and you feel like because you're living a certain way, you're untouchable. Now, obviously, the problem with that and why it's damaging to people is that it's not real. And I learned this in the harshest of harsh ways possible. I was always taught that if people lived life as very good Mormons, they would be protected from bad things happening to them. And, well, let's just say this is part of my story that I've never told here. I've watched some of the most valiant, most devoted, and faithful Mormons on the planet have their entire lives caved in through absolutely no fault of their own. So it is a real problem to teach that if you live a certain way, you will be blessed. I don't think I was ever told nothing bad will ever happen to you, but you are taught that you will have protection. And I have seen firsthand that you don't. People on the other side that know my story would say, well, this happened to you and your family, but you don't have cancer, you're not dying. There's always a comeback with people that have religious faith because they're believing in something that is not seen or heard or proven to be there. And you can't really argue against that. I'll just say that. When you tell children and young people something that is a lie, you're setting people up for psychological disaster. You're making promises you cannot keep, and it's very dangerous. Damn near killed me. And that is why I have such an issue with cults, and that's why I think it's important to talk about them. When people go to leave the Brethren, they are totally and completely ousted from their family. They are literally tossed out onto the street with nothing. No formal education, no connections, no ties, very little material possessions. It is awful. I watched a documentary where some cult experts made contact with a member of the Brethren that was still in, but willing to give them information. They actually smuggled this member a laptop so he could communicate with the cult experts. And this is where the information starts to get very, very dark. In a sect of the Brethren in New Zealand in the 1980s, a 17-year-old male, a boy, left the cult. And when he did, he was cut off from everything and everyone he ever knew. Almost 30 years later, this same man's body was found hanging from a tree next to a Brethren meeting room in Perth, Australia. That means that man had taken his own life 30 years after leaving the cult and did so next to a meeting room in order to send a message, a reminder perhaps of, look what you did to me. It is so sad. When members are ejected from the Brethren, they are thrown into a world they are completely unprepared for. They don't know how to navigate it. And what the cult teaches to young children is even worse. Members teach the children, the very young children, that if they ever leave the Brethren, they will burn in hell for all eternity. One former member recalls being told as a 9-year-old that had been bitten by a dog, it would be like having 100 wild dogs biting her and ripping her apart over and over forever, that it would never stop, and not only that, she would be burning at the same time. Now, I don't care what you choose to believe, but you have to be a sick motherfucker to say something like that to a little girl. Ugh, this is how I dry my eyes. Inappropriate laughter. Oh shit. I got way too much old lady makeup on for that. So if I look crazy now, you know why. Here's another disturbing but unsurprising tenet of the Brethren. All men must be married to the assembly before they are married to their wives. Now, there's no ceremony to actually marry the assembly, but the meaning is this. The church comes before your wife, before your marriage, before your children, before your parents, and that is Cult 101. I'm sure it comes as no surprise to any of you that there are people that defend this group and say it's not a cult, it's just a church. If you want to get technical, all churches are cults by definition. There are things outside of church that are also cults. I think CrossFit is a cult. It's probably a much more productive one, but it's kind of culty. And it will not surprise any of you to learn that the Brethren is as homophobic and as bigoted as it gets. I'm going to do an episode on the after effects of religious upbringing on queer people because it's something that we need to talk about, and it's not woke bullshit. It's an important topic. Like, we're trying to have a society here and we should give a shit about 10% of our population, you know? I'm on one today. And I don't even care. I told myself I wasn't going to keep doing this if I had to keep biting my tongue, and it is what it is. And if everybody ends up hating me, then you know what? I guess I just won't do this anymore. I got nothing to lose. And if I'm going to spend all this time on this, I'm going to talk about the stuff I want to talk about. And in that vein, I would like for you to hear this young man's story.
I remember them saying this would be easier for us if you had died.
8 years ago, Matt Cook made the hardest decision of his life, to cut ties with his family.
It was heart-destroying.
Matt grew up in the exclusive Brethren Church, a conservative Christian group that treats scripture as law and separates itself from outside evil.
Their main motto, I guess, is no compromise, which kind of meant that any contact with the outside world was not allowed. So there was no TV, there was no radio.
It's now called the Plymouth Brethren Church. Traced back to England in the 1800s, it's spread to 18 countries with tens of thousands of members worldwide.
It's very controlling, you're kind of watched every step that you take, every decision that you make, you have to get approval for.
There's dress codes, you cannot eat with other people who are out in the world.
As a teenager, Matt was not only questioning the restrictions of the church, but also his sexuality. After years of denial and inner torment, he made the decision to leave the Brethren.
And this is, what cults do. They do cut people off from families, but especially some of these multi-generational cults.
Ros Hodgkins founded a cult support group 30 years ago after her own daughter got caught up in another religious sect.
This is not Christianity. There's no way that this is, looking at, the inclusiveness and the love that should be there for families, for children, to choose their own path in life.
Love of family, this is so important. But I knew by that point that I couldn't stay for them. I had to go for me.
When the church found out Matt wanted to leave, he was excommunicated. He had to pack his things, say goodbye to his family, and start fresh.
A spiritual group is okay to believe whatever it would want to believe, but it's not okay to harm people. It's not okay to break families up. It's not okay to take away the freedom of an individual.
The Brethren has its own schools and high schools that receive government funding that only Brethren children attend. Its members openly worship and live their lives in suburban Australia, but the church has relatively flown under the radar. They call themselves a mainstream Christian church and deny that it's a cult. The church states that family is at the heart of everything they believe and everything they do. 10 News first contacted the Brethren Church to be interviewed, but they declined. When Matt's dad died 2 years after he left the church, he was banned from the funeral service and forced to stand 20 metres away from Brethren members during the burial.
I wanted to be right there. I wanted to be with my family. I wanted to grieve with them.
Now, Matt has built himself an incredible life. He's married to the love of his life, is working his dream job, and has created an amazing circle of friends. But for him, there's still a gaping hole where his family should be.
I still am hopeful, I'm hopeful that, one day they will come around.
Absolutely tragic and heartbreaking to not even be allowed to stand at your father's graveside service. Does any of that seem even remotely related to Jesus? I'm agnostic, but I am very aware of Jesus' teachings, and I don't see Jesus anywhere in any of this. I can certainly see men's behavior. I could say some things that are going to get me in hot water. I don't have to because I know you guys are a smart audience and you will put this together on your own. But listen to this story of a man caught red-handed and the way he is able to talk tens of thousands of people out of believing what they know to be true.
Madeleine Kerr had some nursing experience and was looking after Mr. Taylor. Nobody quite knew why. There was something wrong with his foot or back or something. And she seemed to be spending a lot of time going to his bedroom and, James Alec Gardner was somewhat concerned. And this particular evening, on the Saturday, she'd been in there for a long time, so he felt he had to do something about it, particularly in view of this growing salacious element in Mr. Taylor's teaching and private conversation. So he asked Stanley McCallum, who was quite a well-known Brethren leader, who was also in Aberdeen and staying at a nearby house, to come round, and the two of them went and knocked on the door and went in and found Madeleine Kerr undressed in bed with Mr. Taylor. And that is what happened at Aberdeen. Now, the way it was presented by his followers was that in fact there was nothing immoral in what happened. She had undressed and she was lying on the bed with him, but there'd been nothing improper. And he in fact had engineered this whole incident in order to test who was really following him and who wasn't. In other words, those of us who were following him merely mentally and hadn't got a real vital link with him would fall into the trap and shout scandal and drop his teachings and disown him. Those who were really committed to him would see that it was only something that he'd engineered to expose those who weren't, and everybody would be happy. And from their point of view, that's precisely what happened. 8,000 people left, a fellowship of about 39,000, and the other 31,000 continued quite happily, saying that we'd all been caught by the trap.
I'm telling you, you guys, the things some people are able to convince others of, and the amount of people that aren't able to see through it is really, really scary to me. It's terrifying. It's terrifying because these people, so easily brainwashed and so ready to follow, live among us. They vote and they send their kids to school with our kids, and they run businesses, and it is just scary as hell. Extremism in any form is bad. Right, left, up, down, I don't care what it is. When you go so far to a polar end of anything, you are out of balance. And when you are out of balance, it is very easy to get tipped over into crazy land. Now, as I always say, why does this matter? When we talk about cult stories, who cares? I think most of you know and agree with me, at least that's the feedback I've gotten in the comments. It matters because these cults do damage to people. Yes, many are born into it, especially into the Brethren. So it's important that we talk about these things in order to put information out there, in order to keep the conversation alive, so that if and when people do leave and try to find information, it's there. It's easily accessible to them. I've said it before and I'll say it again. You can disagree if you want. That's your prerogative. But I am my brother's keeper, and it matters to me. I know it matters to a lot of you. I want this information out there for anyone who is looking for a light at the end of a tunnel. According to a cult website that I trust and follow quite closely, the current membership of the Brethren is around 87,000 right now. That is a loss of about 4,000 members from the previous year's reporting. It's the largest loss the cult has ever reported. So the worldwide trend of people leaving structured religion and cults has affected the Brethren. There are members in 24 districts with 887 local meeting houses, and each Sunday about 23,000 people attend their meeting halls. Now, 23,000 is a far cry from 87,000 members, so they must be aware that people are not attending meetings like they used to. Back in 2017, the church, the cult, had about 110,000 members, so their numbers are definitely diminishing. Not fast enough. Again, like I've said in every cult episode I've ever done, people are free to believe and worship whatever they want. That is their right, and even if I don't believe in what they're worshiping, I will fight for their right to do as they please, so long as they do not hurt anyone else. Children do not have a choice when they are born into these controlling and damaging shame and guilt-based belief systems. And as a person in that position, I feel for the children. Their parents are doing what they think is right, but no one knows what is right for someone else. Just as I will fight for the right for the parents to worship as they choose, I will fight for the rights of the children who do not have a choice. I'm not saying I have all of the answers or I even have a solid sketch of a plan on how to right the wrongs that we see, but I'm saying I'm going to talk about it because only through conversation can we possibly arrive at a solution. So for now, we are going to talk about cults here. I will bring you a new cult story every few weeks, and they'll all be grouped together on my playlist, Dark Cults. I think we can all agree the name Dark Cult is a fitting title for this one, The Brethren. Whew, these ones take it out of me, but I like talking about it. I think it's important, and I know you guys do too. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Please hit the like button if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and you can even join my Patreon. By joining Patreon, you keep the channel alive, and we have a goal. We're going to talk about this next week. We're going to start to raise money to donate to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that's never been tested because there's no money. There are thousands of sexual assault kits sitting in refrigeration that have never been tested. They cost between $500 and $750 each. We would like to raise money, pick a case, get that kit tested, and hopefully solve the crime. The other thing that happens is we get that perpetrator's DNA in the system in case they're tied to other crimes. I've been talking about doing this for years, and we are finally going to start. Thank you so much for your support and for being here. I know you guys have so many other options for things to watch, and I really and truly appreciate the fact that you spend a few minutes of your day with me. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other, and I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.